Keep a fire burning red in a Jazela representing of a comes hard here. You know. Big up Kidaki, Buxton massive. Hey Babylon boy, you go on like you know, like come son. Red.
Never joke, never joke, never joke. Oh, money never, money never, money never, money never, money never, money. I don't want you conniving, money. Money never, money never, money never, money. You can keep your conniving, money. When you've been up for a bum, in a bill tell me money. Now because your money done, you come with conniving money. When you had your pocket full, in a bill tell me money. Now because your money done, you hustle for tell me money. Yes, money never, money never, money, money never, money, money. Now I don't want you conniving money. Neighbor joker, neighbor joker, neighbor joker. That's all the money that me walk for. A 2 pound note and a kill that piece. A 2 pound note and a kill that piece. A 2 pound note and a kill that piece. This is all the money that me walk for. I said money never, money never, money never, money. I don't want you conniving money. Oh, Joseph.
Guyana and Guyanese, at home and abroad. Tune in to Guyanese Morning Time, hosted by Kadaki Amsterdam, where the sun always shines. Guyanese Morning Time, the people call it Guyanese Morning Time. Rhythm, Guyanese Morning Time. Intelligence and knowledge run the front line. We go again, Guyanese Morning Time. The people call it Guyanese Morning Time. Rhythm, Guyanese Morning Time. Intelligence and knowledge run the front line. We go again. We rise up early morning watching Comes TV, where wisdom and knowledge, yes, it is the key. Exposing corruption over land and sea, where the wicked politician they try to trick me. Guyana is a land for everybody. With 6 races should live in harmony. Is one set of people getting aisle money. Is one set of people doing the thievery. Beep, Guyanese Morning Time. The people calling Guyanese Morning Time. Rhythm, Guyanese Morning Time. Intelligence and knowledge run the front line. We go again, Guyanese Morning Time. The people calling Guyanese Morning Time. Rhythm, Guyanese Morning Time. Intelligence and knowledge run the front line. We go again. This is a program that you all can see, sharing your views and your integrity. Like it, comment and share it all around. Pass it to your neighbor, safe and sound. A sad situation going on in this town. The voice of the people is getting trampled down. Out of the mouths of babes and sucklings, which has ordained me to sing. I sing Guyanese Morning Time. The people calling Guyanese Morning Time. Rhythm, Guyanese Morning Time. Intelligence and knowledge run the front line. We go again, Guyanese Morning Time. The people calling Guyanese Morning Time. Rhythm, Guyanese Morning Time. Intelligence and knowledge run the front line. We go again, fooling the people. You're promoting evil. Stop lying to the people. You are a part of the cycle. Stop fooling people. You're promoting evil. Stop lying to the people. You are a part of the cycle. I say Guyanese Morning Time. The people calling Guyanese Morning Time. Rhythm, Guyanese Morning Time. Intelligence and knowledge run the front line. We go again, Guyanese Morning Time. time. The people calling Guyanese morning time. Rhythm, Guyanese morning time. Intelligence and knowledge run the front line. We go again. They got Breakford, Bork and Mark Benchcop. David Hines and Kadaki Amsterdam. Sherrod Duncan, Nigel London. Normal Brown and Gavin Matthews. Big up Paslow, Port People Governor. Simona Brooms, Robin Simpson. Hampton Green and Winston Jordan. And yes, we can go right on and on. Guyanese morning time. The people calling Guyanese morning time. Rhythm, Guyanese morning time. Intelligence and knowledge run the front line. We go again, Guyanese morning time. The people calling Guyanese morning time. Rhythm, Guyanese morning time. Intelligence and knowledge run the front line. We go again.
The relatives and friends of young Quinton Bacchus, they deserve justice. The family, the relatives and friends of our in Boston, they deserve justice. The family, the relatives and friends of Peter Headley, they deserve justice.
And so when we say that Guyana is an apartheid state, we have the evidence to show.
It's karaoke and oldies night this and every Thursday with Al Christie and popular DJs at Club Twilight, Sideline down Buxton North.
Trust me, if you are on the East Coast, you're in Buxton, you're in town, you're looking for a place to get away to, this is the place. The Cutters, and then of course the ambience is beautiful, fully air conditioned, the decor is on point, the music's on point, everything's on point. So if you want to find a nice little place where you can just drive out of town and have some drinks, have some food, you can call, you can order your stuff and just take it. You don't have to stay. Or if you want to stay here, that's what's up. And of course, they have special events for Valentine's. You can rent a hall. You can rent a hall, honey. You can rent a hall for weddings, for birthday parties, to have a bash. I hope he edits that out. But you know, whatever it is, this is definitely the place to be. So it's on Sideline Dam. You definitely want to ensure that you check this place out. But it's on your to-do list. All right, on your to-do list. This is definitely the place to check out, you know, a really cool, chill spot here in Buxton. I like this. This is Buxton needed this. We needed this. I needed this. You definitely need it too. All right, so you might be wondering where we are. Still in Buxton at Club Twilight. That's where we are. So Club Twilight also has like an Airbnb as well. So you could come, drink, drunk, and come in the back here and lie down. Look at that. Look at that. Perfection. And the people come in the room and so on. The bed sheet matching the blind, matching the carpet, matching the this, matching the that. We know what we think in Buxton, don't play with we. So definitely if you want to come and, you know, you may be having a wedding or whatever, and you just want to overnight and just have a good time because you're going to be drunk. We got too much road accidents. So you definitely want to come, drink, have a good time. They have several rooms that you can rent. You have your toilet, you have your bath, you have your sink, you have your dining area, you have the bed. This is nice. I like it. Anyways, to my friends and my family, if you're looking for me, I'll be overnighting. Also for those persons who are traveling in from overseas, you want a nice, cozy place out of town, then Club Twilight, call them up, look them up on social media. They have their own Facebook page, and ensure that you come up the side and have a good time. Have a good time. Have a good time. Sorry, I'm sorry. That's it.
Don't be a victim. Beat the heat with EC Crystals. Party ice in large and small quantities. Call 682-7981 or visit us at Club Twilight, Sideline Dam, Buxton North. EC Crystals, pure party ice. Stop running around like headless chicken. Go to Ashton's Marketplace for whole and cut chicken, beef, pork, processed meats like bacon, beef franks, smoked ham, ground pork, calabresa, and lots more. Ashton's offers wholesale and retail. Check them out. Call 613-2332 or WhatsApp 434-327-3955. Ashton's Marketplace at 72 Rob Street, Border.
All right, so today we are here at Club Twilight up in Buxton, and we are here to talk about all that's going on up here. Trust me, if you are on the East Coast, you're in Buxton, you're in Tongue, you're looking for a place to get away to, this is the place. The Cutters, mwah. Listen, I'll be having some just now again. We'll talk about that. And then, of course, the ambience is beautiful, fully air conditioned. The decor is on point. The music's on point. Everything's on point. It's just me. I need some work. But everything else that belongs to this club here is on point. So if you want to find a nice little place where you can just drive out of town and have some drinks, have some food, you can call, you can order your stuff and just take it. You don't have to stay. Or if you want to stay here, that's what's up. And of course, they have special events for Valentine's. You can rent a hall. You can rent a hall, honey. You can rent a hall for weddings, for birthday parties, to have a bash. I hope he edits that out. But you know, whatever it is, this is definitely the place to be. So it's on Sideline Dam. You definitely want to ensure that you check this place out. But it's on your to-do list. All right, on your to-do list. This is definitely the place to check out, you know, a really cool, chill spot here in Buxton. I like this. This is, Buxton needed this. We needed this. I needed this. You definitely needed too. Thank you.
Comes out your son. You burn this wine when I want you shine. The tree of life, them I want you climb, cause them heart no kind. Comes, I say them heart no kind. Buxton Massive. Kidaki, Red Hat.
You can get meat anywhere, but for the best cuts of chicken, beef, pork, mutton, and lots more, check out T&W Harris Butcher Shop, located in the East Ramvelt Market Meat Section. Call us on 609-7168, 641-4494. Ask for Rastaman. T&W Harris Butcher Shop for the best in fresh cut meats and lots more.
Went to a dance a Clarendon, me and a big fat thing named Pam.
Club Twilight presents Sunday 26th January, the big people after lunch and oldies bacchanal. Yes, at Club Twilight, Sideline Dam, Buxton North. Music by Supercat One Man Band, Camps Audio, Disco Baby, and popular DJs. Check it out. It's the big people after lunch oldies bacchanal at Club Twilight. Sunday 26th January. It's gonna be a back in time movie. Put a black man for my hand. Morning, neighbor, morning. Are you morning? Welcome to another program of Guyanese Morning Time. I am your host, Kidaki Amsterdam. It is now 7 hours 26 on the 15th day of January in the year 2024. How you been? How are you been? What's going on? How are you there? How was I yesterday? What about last night? You rested well? What gave you hope yesterday that, you know, things looking up and you can look forward to a better year, better Ghana, better 2025. A few days from now is budget day. Friday to be exact is budget day. What are you expecting out of the budget? Oh, come in. What's happening? It's Wednesday and we have Dr. Hines in the house. So we're going to be talking with the doctor on a number of things as usual. And so, what do I say? Don't want to say too much. Don't want to keep the doctor waiting too long. When I say waiting too long, I remember as a youth man, they had a song "Waiting Too Long." I think they was Shabarang, right? Flex, that's the name of the song. How flexible are you? Welcome to the program, Dr. Hines. Morning, buddy. How you doing?
Good morning. I'm doing.
Is it your first program with us in the year? I think. Am I right?
Yes.
Welcome back and Happy New Year.
Thank you.
It took you 15 days to get back here. You've been on a long travel. Yeah. What's going on? What's happening? Over by your end there, I see Trump was sworn in or something. What was the temperature in the US?
Not so fast.
Oh, not so fast. What's happening on the political front in the US with Trump president-elect, soon to be sworn in, and is the word inaugurated and so on?
Yeah. I'm yelling because when I come on a program like this, I would prefer to talk less about Trump.
Okay, but they say in this instance, Trump is important to our discourses because one would argue that the 2020 elections, the final outcome of the 2020 elections, was to a large extent influenced by the Trump administration.
Yes.
Wrong or right?
That's correct.
Good. And so, go ahead.
The Great administration was literally overthrown.
Good. And so if we're talking about the election immediately after, and we were talking about getting rid of the PPP, and Trump is back in government in the US, then obviously Trump is a major playing factor in this whole issue, this current elections. You think?
Well, the United States has always been involved in our elections, dating back as far as 1953. So if you're talking about that aspect, yes.
But certainly, in more recent times, I would say times that I can recall, because I was a young adult then, perhaps, and more aware, Jimmy Carter has had an influence in the Ghana political outcomes, the elections of 1992. That was the 1990 election, postponed, I think, ended up at 92. When the Carter Center intervened and we had a change in the construct of GCOM. Am I right?
Yes.
And so the legacy of Jimmy Carter is a GCOM right now that, for all intents and purposes, we believe is not serving the best interests of the Guyanese electorate.
The last part is correct. It's not serving the best interests of the Guyanese electorate. The first part is not so correct. That is Jimmy Carter's legacy.
Well, tell us, clarify for me, because I'm misguided here or misinformed.
Well, Jimmy Carter oversaw negotiations that led to the present GCOM construct. But that construct was meant to be temporary. And thanks to the Guyanese leaders, it has now become permanent. Not Jimmy Carter's wish. It was supposed to be a stopgap measure. And Jimmy Carter, a decade later in 2004, left Guyana in almost anger at the PPP, saying that the PPP had no intention of sharing power in Guyana. His primary outcome was for some form of shared governance, a national government in Guyana. And he left saying that Jack Dio and the PPP have no interest in a national government. So it's not fair to say that the present construct is his legacy. It's more the legacy of the PPP. And to some extent, the other opposition parties, mainly the PNC, because they have not been able to come together to change what was supposed to be a stopgap measure.
And so GCOM in its current form, I guess, is legislated.
Yes, it is.
What will it take to change it now?
Legislation.
And political will from both sides, I guess.
Well, yes, that is what Carter left angry about, that there was no political will to change that and to change some other things that needed to be changed and still need to be changed.
I would think that given, as we would say, the evidence has been seen by both sides of how the current construct of GCOM could be, if I say anti-democratic, could be against the best interests of whichever one is in opposition. The political heavyweights would want to arrive at a construct that, regardless of who's in power, GCOM functions independently and delivers free, fair, and credible elections. Is that too much to ask?
Well, it's not too much to ask. But it's too much to, it's a lot to put in place given the nature of our society. Even as you talk about the present construct in GCOM, the construct before that was really a construct that was controlled by one party. And so this construct was meant to give the opposition some say. Because remember, the construct is one in which the opposition suggests, first of all, you have a partisan, you continue the partisan construct. But whereas before 1992, it was one party, now you have two parties, both parties. The key there is the chairmanship. And the opposition under the construct has the power to suggest names, and the president is bound to choose one of those names. At least that is what the court said as recent as a few years ago, when Granger he actually appointed somebody, and the court said it went against, it violated the present construct. And so in many regards, the present construct was an improvement on the older construct. But as I said, it was a stopgap measure, and the two sides should have hammered out a more superior measure. Now, the problem is, no, it's not so much the partisan nature of GCOM, because both parties are represented at GCOM. The ruling party gets 3, and the opposition party gets 3. That is hardly discriminatory. Where the discrimination comes is with the chairperson, that the construct assumes an independent chair. And the construct has broken down largely because we do not have an independent chair.
I'm sitting here and I'm thinking, even the construct that we're talking about, to some extent, gives the quote-unquote opposition an advantage, because if they have to propose names and the government or the president has to select from that list of proposed names, I'm not going to propose anybody that I think is unfavorable to me. And so to some extent, the names I propose are naturally going to be favorable to me, I would think. And so that puts the president or whoever has to select that person in a bind.
Well, you're partly correct. You are not going to want to propose someone who is unfavorable to you, but you also would not want to propose someone who's favorable to the other party. And that's where the whole question of independence comes in. In Guyana, it's very difficult to find anyone who would be accepted as independent by both sides. All the chairpersons that we have been criticized by one side or the other. You know what's the interesting thing about this construct? Is that not only must the opposition give 5 names to the president, but the opposition is bound to consult, the opposition leader is bound to consult with other parliamentary parties in coming up with those 5 names. All right? Do Not Sing, who was a chairperson and operated pro-PPP, before he was proposed, he was not PPP, certainly outwardly. He was proposed by the WPA. He was the WPA election agent at one point. He was close to the WPA. And that was one of the names that the WPA proposed to Hoyt. But guess what happened? When the names were given to Jagan, Jagan chose the only Indian on the list, which was Do Not Sing. That is, he chose an Indian, although that Indian was not openly PPP. I don't know if you get me, as we Guyanese would say, right? Okay. As it turned out, Do Not operated more as pro-PPP. Then you had Suraj Bali, who was again suggested by the WPA and also was the only Indian on the list. And the PPP, Jack Dio this time chose the only Indian on the list. In the end, the PPP got mad at Suraj Bali because they wanted Suraj Bali to act in ways that were favorable to them at the 2015 election, and he refused to. And they promptly campaigned for his removal. So the present system is much more nuanced than we make it out to be. All right? Look, it's better for both parties to be at the table at GCOM than only one party. It's better. Both parties are represented there, and both parties are going to look after their interests. Like I said, the problem with the system is the chair.
Should we look for non-Guyanese chair?
I wouldn't say we should. It is something that could be considered. I don't know that a non-Guyanese would be less partisan than a Guyanese, you know. Look, it's the nature of the society. It is the nature of the society. You know, Suraj Bali did the best of all of them. And this is because Suraj Bali came up with his own mechanism for governing a partisan commission. That as chair, he did not use his casting vote. When there was a deadlock, he looked for measures and looked for ways to bring the two sides together. And often he succeeded. I think he only used the casting vote one time. And that is when they were pressuring him. Ramatara-led PPP was pressuring him to open some boxes. Open some boxes. Does that ring a bell? To open some boxes and to do a quote-unquote recount. And Suraj Bali said no. use this casting vote. Other than that, his mode of governance in a partisan commission was not to use his casting vote, because if he voted with the PPP, he would be seen as PPP. He voted with the PNC/opposition, he would be seen as opposition. So his way around that was not to use the casting vote. And so in many regards, he managed GCOM, I think, I would argue, the most effective of all the chairpersons we've had.
And he perhaps left a blueprint that nobody else has followed.
Well,
or nobody.
Madam Chair, presently would say that she doesn't have to follow that blueprint because the law doesn't require her to. The law doesn't require a chair to not use a casting vote. This is left to the discretion of the chair. And I don't know that a law precluding the chairperson from using a casting vote may fly in the National Assembly. Right? I am not sure of that. Right? There are other ways one can get around that. You can have perhaps a rotating system where in one instance, the opposition gives the president 5 names, and probably for half of the term, the government gives the opposition 5 names to choose one. Those are all things you can't be wrong with. But it is very, very difficult to have an impartial GCOM system in a country like Guyana that is so divided. It's bicommunal, it's sometimes divided outside of reason. You know, Jamaica had the problem. Jamaica is very divided, not along ethnic lines, but along party political lines. And you had the same effect in Jamaica as you had in Guyana. But the Jamaicans have worked. They didn't go down the road of a partisan GCOM, and depending on an impartial chair. They went for impartiality. And apparently they have been able to find enough Jamaicans who are prepared to work towards an impartial electoral system and machinery. And so, you know, they have struck luck. In Guyana, we are not even close to that.
And so we have this as I like to say, conundrum, this stalemate at GCOM over biometrics and the clean voters list. Based on recent utterings, you think we're any closer to getting biometrics? This is an election year. We got what, about 10 months?
You know, in 1990, people asked the same question: was it possible to change the system and have a more inclusive and democratic system? And if you had asked that question before Carter came, we all would have said no. But Carter came, and it happened. So I give you that roundabout answer to say that in politics you never say never.
Never say never. And so we live in hope.
No. If we lived in hope, you would not be sitting where you are this morning. You are not living in hope. That you continue the struggle. It was Frederick Douglass who said, and his formulation is was apt then and is apt today, that power concedes nothing without a demand. It never will. It never did and never will. And he went on to say sometimes people want to reap political benefits without fighting for them. No, we are not living in hope. We are struggling. And you don't know when the dam is going to burst. As what I said, constant banging bus pipe. But if you're not bang, or we go bust. You sit down and leave it and say, live in hope? No.
Well, that raises a critical question. Are we banging? Is there enough banging taking place to bust?
That's what you are doing right now. Start with yourself.
Is enough banging
if you start with yourself and you appreciate what you are doing, you will better appreciate what others are also doing. Perhaps not in the same way as you are doing it, but that people are engaged in struggle. Walter Rodney used to tell us, look, if a man can only live 5 pounds, give 5 pounds. Don't give 10 pounds. Because if you give 10 pounds, you lose it. You can't lift it up. All right? We must appreciate as political activists that we are not the only people who are right. We are not the only people who are making a difference. We are not the only people who are struggling. Everybody is making a contribution. They may not make at the same level that you want them to make it. All right? As I said, the way politics work is what I said, the revolution will not be televised. That in the twinkling of an eye, everything can change within a couple of hours, a couple of days. In Grenada, and sorry for my little lecture, in Grenada, the NGM got word that Gary had left the country, gone to the United Nations. And they got word that he has left instructions to lock up the leadership of the NGM. They immediately went into hiding. And they had an emergency meeting what to do. And they were divided. Some of them wanted to make the move to overthrow the government. Others didn't want to do it. They didn't feel it was wise. In the end, apparently a majority were one of them. And they decided to make their move. And they went from, as you're saying, sitting, doing nothing, to overthrowing a government. Not because they met and said, now is the time to overthrow the government. It's that they got word that they would have been locked up. Whether it was true or not true, that was their intelligence. They went underground. The question is what to do. They argued among themselves. They eventually agreed, let's move on the government, and they did. And they were successful. The point I am making is that they did not go there and sit down and say, Gary's out of the country, let's move on the government. No, that's not how it happened. So sometimes those of us with these big microphones have to be very careful when we are engaged in this rhetoric about struggle, that we don't come over as though we are in this thing, but we're not confident that the thing gonna give the best. I am confident every day that we can overcome, and we will overcome. Every day. Even when the deck is against us. I am still convinced for my 50-odd years as a political activist. That is what it has taught me. To always, because if you are confident that change is going to come someday, as Sam Cooke says, you will be ready when the opportunity presents itself. But if you think that, well, we depend stupidness, the opportunity will come and pass us by.
Thank you for that. And while we're talking about struggle and what is being done, today is the day when the High Court, I think, is going to listen to a case. I think today might be the case management meeting, if I can call it that, because usually these things have a case management and so on, of the opposition approach to the courts to basically question, as I would say, what's happening over GCOM, right? In terms of registration and cleaning the voters list and so on. The Chief Justice is set to hear that matter sometime today. So let's listen out and hear what that outcome will be. Right? Let's listen out and hear what that outcome will be. Dr. Hines, in this democracy, we're hearing of words such as corruption being banned from use in the National Assembly. Can you recall a time when Ghana or the National Assembly members were so dictated to?
Well, I can't remember that words were banned. I remember people were banned from Parliament. Look. A big part of our problem is the PPP. But if we stop there, we would assume that if the PPP is removed, everything will fall in place. And that is not true. We have a political problem in that we have one party that has no commitment to fundamental change, no commitment to a national solution. But we also have institutions that facilitate that kind of behavior. So the problem is both political and institutional. So although we have never had a word banned, there have been people who have been banned from Parliament because the Speaker could do it, he did it. And that is what I mean by we have both an institutional problem and a political problem.
Is the banning of the use of such a word as corruption in a society that many consider one of the most corrupt in these parts of the world an indication of the depth that the current administration will go to be dictatorial?
Look, all of our administrations, I mean, from independence, well, before independence, because slavery and colonialism weren't democratic. And we have had a democratic deficit in our post-colonial era. Sometimes it gets worse than normal, and we are living in times in which it is much worse than it has ever been. You know, so you know, I've been thinking about the use of these words, like democracy and dictatorship, and in many regards, like myself, have to take some responsibility, because I heard your program yesterday, in which you were arguing with somebody who was talking about Burnham dictatorship, and you were pointing out quite correctly to them that you now have the Jack Dio PPP dictatorship. But what has happened is that dictatorship has come with a political name and a political face. So Burnham and PNC have been tagged as the dictatorship and the dictator. And that was so strong that when we came face to face with a succeeding dictatorship, when we put that name to them, it never stuck. The dictatorship name, term, tag, has never really stuck to PPP. And so the PPP, in many regards, gets away with a lot of dictatorial things without being called dictatorial. Because again, the nature of our society is divided by communal, ethnically divided. And when you put a tag on a party leader, that tag slides down to the party, and then it slides down to the membership and support base. So that over time, it's African Guyanese who have come to carry the tag of election thieves. While in the meantime, the PPP been thieving their out of elections. Because the way we, when we come to observe elections, the way we sign off on the credibility of an election, it is not whether the election was free and fair. It is whether the bad things that are being done by one side or the other is enough to change the outcome of the elections. So when they went into the boxes in 2020 and they found that the PPP has been engaging in electoral malpractice before the election, they reasoned that those malpractices were not enough to overturn the election. Now, you may ask, how do they know that? Well, they don't have to know it. They just declare it. And so the PPP gets away with thieving elections because the tag of thieving elections has been left on the PNC. And enough PPP people repeat dictatorship, Burnham, dictatorship, Burnham, that it becomes gospel over a time. And, you know, when we live in these societies, we compare ourselves with our neighbors. And so Burnham dictatorship, his neighbor who was fighting him must be a Democrat. And that's where we are in Guyana. It's difficult to convince PPP supporters / Indian Guyanese that Burnham was not a dictator. And once they get that in their heads, it is hard for them to then conclude that their leader is also a dictator. And it's one of the legacies of the divided nature of our society and the way in which our political culture processes politics and political behavior.
I dare argue the difference there is that during the period when Burnham was allegedly a dictator, Afro-Guyanese who one would believe were naturally supporters of the PNC objected, they criticized, they challenged that kind of behavior. And in this era, we're seeing quite the opposite. One can argue that for the greater part, Indo-Guyanese have not been sounding their voices against this behavior of the PPP. Case in point, or for example, the WPA is known to have been a staunch critic, opposition to the Burnham government and the dictatorial style of governance. Can we find, quote unquote, a parallel in this year?
A parallel of what? A parallel to
the
what?
WPA fighting Burnham back then, and dictatorship as against the PPP dictatorship, and who's fighting them now?
I'm not sure I understand what you're getting at. But listen, you don't experience centuries of enslavement and colonialism and come out of that experience with a love for centralization of power and monopolization of power. So that the African Guyanese response to the centralization and misuse of power arises out of our lived experience over 4 centuries. And so instinctively, African Guyanese recoil against dictatorial behavior in high places. And that includes their own, that they could vote for a party, they could support a party, but they could also say that that party is wrong. It comes out of their lived experience, where they had the instinct of wanting freedom, but also the instinct of not liking dictatorship, centralization, monopolization of power. It means it's a political culture that is somewhat nuanced. You know, you vote for the PNC, but then you look around, you see the PNC is not doing as well as you expect them to do, and you berate them, you pull them up. As recent as the Granger administration, for all, you know, we fight, we contend that Granger was overthrown, and he was. But most Black people will tell you and fight for his right not to have been overthrown. But they will also tell you he made some errors. That is part of the African Guyanese political culture. I am not sure that Indian Guyanese have developed the same kind of political culture. So it's not a case where Indian Guyanese people wake up in the morning and say, I am not going to criticize the PPP. I am not going to fight the PPP for the same thing that I fought Burnham. They don't do that. I think it arises from the political culture or political subculture in which they engage the duality of support and opposition in the same way as African Guyanese tend to do it. Some may argue that the African Guyanese approach has been suicidal. You know, people like you, although you weren't around, you were a child then, but you still have to pay for our sins. Some people still felt that the WPA should not have opposed Burnham, you know, that he was Black and he may have been doing wrong, but we should not have socialized people to oppose him, because what it did is it's opened the gates for an Indian government, and that Indian government comes in and you hear them talk about the WPA like dogs. Dogs. Then it was WPA's action that was partly, some would say largely, responsible for them being in power. In 1992, there was not a clear majority. The WPA actually gave the PPP a seat in Region 8 for them to get a majority in Parliament. They forget, or they forget that, right? So the point I'm making is that there's some Black people who still beat us up for opposing our own, when the other side not opposed their own. It is no secret that they were Indian Guyanese who were WPA. And once 1992 came and the PPP won the election, they drifted away from the WPA. People say the WPA today, or what is left of the WPA, is African Guyanese. And it's not because David Hines wake up and say WPA will be an African Guyanese party. The Indians left. Indians left. There was nothing to struggle for anymore. You were struggling against Burnham dictatorship. The dictatorship is gone. You are not going to say the outcome of my struggle against dictatorship is dictatorship itself. The Indian Guyanese community has not made that determination. Carter made that determination, that he came to help to bring down a dictatorship, and he left with the sad realization that the outcome of bringing down one dictatorship is putting in place another dictatorship. But the studies of authoritarian regimes show that. It shows that there are three outcomes when you bring down what you call or what you deem to be a dictatorial government. One is that it could be replaced by a democracy. Second, things can remain the same. Third, you can get an enhanced dictatorship. The scholars of authoritarianism have found that. And so therefore not surprising that in our case, we bring down an authoritarian regime, but the outcome is not democracy. It's not even the same like we had. It's worse. And the literature, the research has shown that to be possible. Evan is reminding us that Burnham despises the WPA. I think Jack Dio despises the WPA more. It's just of history. The groups like the WPA are what you call problem for everybody, including some good people. A lot of people would like to see the Guyana situation in purely black and white. PNC, PPP. Once you put other variables into the mix, headaches start. Because it's no longer simple. You have to answer why in 1970s Walter Rodney came back to Guyana and was able to lead the mobilization of African Guyanese mostly, but also Indian Guyanese. You got to think things through to answer that. If you say, it's PNC versus PPP, story done. You don't got to work your brains no more. So you hear people say, WPA dead, AFC dead. Because once you kill them, you can be lazy. Once the AFC and the WPA and other third parties are around, you can't be lazy. You have to explain. In 2006, the AFC, mostly middle class Africans, got together and they were able to win 5 or 6 seats, which came from the PNC. How do you explain that? How do you explain in 2011, those 5 or 6 seats went back to the PNC, but the AFC got 5 or 6 seats, this time from Indians? How do you explain those things? You can't be lazy. But once you say WPA dead, you can be lazy. Never mind, the same people who are saying WPA dead, they are cussing David Hines for being the lead person in preparing Africans to cause violence if the elections are lost. WPA is dead. But one of the WPA leaders got so much influence that the fear is that he would influence black people to behave bad if they lose the 2025 election. You can't have some more contradiction than that. But when the people were saying WP is there, they don't see that contradiction. They don't see it, although it stares them in their face, because they're down the easy road. They're down the easy road. You know, Nigel Hughes is not going to get votes because he couldn't count right, and he hung out too much with black people. He take up black causes, and so forth. But every Thursday, their leader spends hours cussing Nigel Hughes. Contradiction, but they don't see it. If you notice the pollsters, they would poll PNC, PPP, and now they would put in the AFC because they can't avoid them. They're in parliament. But they don't put the WPA in. They don't put parties like that. Because if you're a pollster, you have to ask people, you know, do you favor PNC, PPP, AFC, WPA? But if you put a naked question in them, who would you vote for in the next election? They're more likely or less likely to include a WPA in there. And they're more likely to say PNC or PPP. And so, in a sense, what our polling does is that it limits the choices of people in terms of their preferences. So, Guyana is not an easy place. Guyana is not an easy place.
Not an easy place indeed. I am talking about that fear, or the belief that WP or the leader of the WP, co-leader of the WP, is influencing and preparing African Guyanese to misbehave if the elections are lost and so on. I noticed the General Secretary of the PPP saying that the PPP has never behaved or doesn't behave, I would say, disorderly when it comes to elections and elections losses. I also noticed the ERC saying it is inviting African representative groups like ACDA and so on to sit around the table and talk about protecting their interest in an election period that is expected to be of high tension and divisiveness and so on. What are your thoughts on these quote unquote pronouncements in this elections year, as if these things have just fallen from the sky?
Well, I don't pay too much of attention to the ERC. They may have summoned me to go before them about 3 or 4 times. I never went. Maybe it's an act of omission on my part because they are an important constitutional body. But I want to deal with the question of who behaves bad at elections. All of our elections from 1961, except the 2006 election, the result of all of our elections have been contested by the losers. In 1964, even before the election, Dr. Jagan called on his supporters to create hell in Guyana, and they did. There were 4 years of racial violence in the 60s, 61, 62, 63, and 64. And 64 was the worst. When Dr. Jagan realized that he was outwitted by the British, Duncan Sands, and the British changed the system from first past the post to proportional representation, he immediately said, we are being cheated, and called out his forces. Lives were lost. Property were destroyed. Our village, for example, was not part of the story until 1964. So there is evidence of the PPP behaving badly around election. Between 68 and 92, the PPP wasn't sitting down when it said that the PNC was rigging election. They were born in canes. They were attacking PNC activists / Black people in the communities. They were engaging in violence. Not overt violence. A lot of it was covert, but it was overt enough for it to be noticed. And then the recent election in 2020, before GCOM did its dance, and it appeared as though the PPP was not going to be awarded the elections. Indian people in Lusignan and Bad Settlement and Bushlat beat up Black people, not just Black people, beat up Black police, stone children. But if you were to say to the average Indian person that the PPP engage in violence, they would say no. Even though that thing only happened 5 years ago, they say no. Part of it is we have a media that behaves in strange ways, The media never made a big noise about that violence by PPP supporters against African people. It happened, but the media never played it up, so it never happened. The media gave more attention to the violence that erupted at Monrepo. It was violence against East Indians, and the assumption that it was violence by Black people. And the narrative of Black people, PNC supporters, are more likely to engage in violence, snaps in. So when Indians are engaging in violence, because the narrative does not support it, that violence is seen as a blip. That violence is seen as more the exception than the rule. But when Black people engage in violence, a lot of attention is given to it because it falls in to this subtext, this narrative that we walk around with, wittingly or unwittingly. You know, you're somewhere in New York, and at 2 o'clock in the morning on a lonely street, you see a little Black boy with the hoodie on, and you promptly cross the street to the next side. And Black people do it too. It's not just white people who do it. But you see a white man looking like a junkie, and you keep walking. You don't cross the street for because he's white. It's the kind of unconscious racialization or the racialization of consciousness. And so there are these assumptions that are being made. You know, one of my comrades who does not agree with my activism in defense of African people. You know, she told me, she said, I want you to know that people frighten Black people. She was stating a fact. And the assumption was that since people frighten black people, and you are out there defending black people, speaking up for them, mobilizing them, people will frighten you. It was a chilling moment. And it shows that this racialization of the consciousness really has a lot of currency in our society.
It's 22 minutes past the 8 o'clock, or we are approaching the time when we will open up the lines. But Dr. Hines, you mentioned those periods of violence, and you said Boxer never got involved until 19. Good morning, morning. Morning, neighbor, morning. Are you morning? Welcome to another program of Guyanese Morning Time. I am your host, Kidaki Amsterdam. Welcome to the program. It is now 26 minutes. It's now 26 minutes past the 7 o'clock hour on the 16th of January in the year 2024. I am having a little technical difficulty. I need to resolve it. And so you're finding me going in and out. It's not super. It's Kidaki. Yes, so how are you? How was your yesterday? How was your last night? How things looking for you today and tonight and so on and so forth? Are things looking up? Are you optimistic that today will be a better day than yesterday? It's the day, what is it, penultimate day? It's the day before. Yes, the day before we have the budget presented. What are you expecting out of the budget? Huh? Are you optimistic that, Guyanese? You know what? Let's play the ERC song. And then we'll come back.
Sit down at home beside the watch some TV, listening to the news like Gordon Mosley, and listening to the things that he say detracting tonight, paying close attention to make sure I hear it right. Now when I hear the things that he mentioned on the news, I had to declare, them kind of thing got me confused. I hear some things where the ERC noticing, and it convinced people that people they learning nothing. We hear so many times about them big name calling, and they say ERC pretend that they didn't learn nothing. But once you're black and you just decide to say a word or two, bet your life on that. They say ERC coming for you. Listen to the things you just hear on social media. Only one set of people allowed to talk in one Guyana. I still say nothing black people in learning. But this is my concern. I hope one day black people will learn. Something about this ERC that I would like to know. If any of its members happens to be black people, and if that is the case, I want them to answer this call. Tell me how come none of them ain't got no voice at all. You're showing signs of weakness and you're afraid to be fair, and we see the same thing keep happening year after year. And the day will come when all this nonsense will stop. That will be the day when black people decide to wake up. Not so long ago, something terrible happened. This young Indian man want to kill out all black people by poison. But if his shoes was on the other foot, what have been a big threat. But up to this day, this ERC can do nothing as yet.
Oh, let's start over. Morning, neighbor, morning. How are you doing? Welcome to another program of Guyanese Morning Time. I am your host, Kidaki Amsterdam. It is 29 minutes to the 8 o'clock hour on the 16th of January in the year 2025. How have you been? How was your yesterday? How are you faring today? How was your last night? Are you optimistic that, things will look up for you? Are you optimistic? The name of the singer is Bascom. I think Claude Bascom is his name. A little video and put its credit and so on. Yes. Yeah. Today's the day before budget day. What are you expecting out of the budget tomorrow? You think the multi-trillion-dollar budget tomorrow is going to be focused on alleviating the poverty that the common man lives in? Or it is going to be focused on buying votes and enriching the friends of the PPP, friends, family, and cronies? More contracts to the likes of, the Tyra Gal and her comrades, and so on and so forth. What do you all think? I'd like to know. I would really like to know. Nevertheless, it is, that time of day when I call Mr. Jordan and let him talk to us, because I'm sure he has a lot of insights into the budget today. So let's call him up.
How come it's only black people committing cybercrime? When pretty on social media posting people all the time. I still saying black people in learning. But one day will come when the entire table will turn. this excuse we see they fail to condemn, because these people think that the law is only for them. And anybody else who decide to file a complaint, they go call you a racist and don't want to hear nothing. Plenty complaint from time to time has been brought to their attention, but because of this one-sided cybercrime, it's why they don't show any concern. There's only one set of people that they really care about, and that people must take the abuse and shut them out. Kidaki Amsterdam went to court just recently for an issue that was a...
Good morning, sir. Welcome to the People's Station. How you do? It's another Thursday.
Good morning, Kadaki. Thankful Thursday. Good morning to you and our viewers and so on. I'm doing as well as you can get. Thanking the Lord for health and strength. Basically, you know, and each new day in this country here is a survival day. And you have to be very thankful that you made it, you know. So many others have not. So you have to be very thankful. Yeah, also the sun is rising. Bob Marley says the weather is sweet. Time to move your dancing feet, you know. Maybe it's too early to dance this morning, but every praise and glory. How are you doing?
I did, man. I did digging some nice soca dedicated to the ERC and so.
Yes. You know,
powerful tune, you know. I think the tune would win the competition if only they would allow it.
I got to make the if also. I got to make the if also. You know, it's that time of the year also when Mashamani, you know, when this guy who died, Fenty, and Fenty used to make certain that Mashamani was in the air even before the air broke. And I as recently last week, I heard people asking, well, what happened to Mashamani? They weren't hearing anything. So it's good to hear now and then a calypso or two playing.
We don't just say Mashamani no more. We doing carnival.
Well, I don't know anything about carnival, but we it's a pity that we haven't really done much for all art forms, not only the mash. Our artists, I couldn't tell you who are our budding artists. You know, we don't have a cultural village where, you know, you can say like in Main Street there, in that middle of Main Street, instead of taking down what they had up there for Christmas, they could have kept that as a permanent fixture and expose our artists and our and pottery and the people who are good at leather and, you know, all kind of different things, woods and so on. You know, and it could have been like a craft market extending from, say, Lamaha Street to right up to Church Street. You know,
if you leave that thing up as a permanent structure, money ain't gonna make, man. You know, that's the hardest thing. We put up money, put up something every time we gotta do something.
No, money gonna make, but they gonna make for the wrong people.
Exactly.
Money gonna make, but they gonna make for the wrong people.
That's my point.
You know, but you know, but even the cultural people themselves also seem not to be, except for this man with him, Desmond Ali, as I always keep reading him in the people's. He keeps promoting the arts and so on, but like nobody's listening to him. But unfortunate. But I hope Mashamani turns out to be a grand occasion. They got lots of money. I hope the floats don't be as one track as they are, and I don't want to be just a skimpy dress parade. That seems to be in fashion. You know, creativity seems to be lost.
You might see the PPP manifesto in action.
Oh yes, you can see that definitely. Long queues of bread. James Bond might be heading the PPP contingent. Who knows?
Which section?
Yeah. The potential minister of sports.
They're looking for a home section.
I left James Bond alone, by the man got any red shot and he already speaking loud and clear.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, yesterday I heard David Hines talking about this. When you asked him the question about the racial discrimination story in the police force, I heard him mention a couple of things, and I thought that I could add my 2 cents.
Very well.
To it really. So okay, so we know that in recent times, more particularly last week or the week before, that our embattled assistant commissioner Calvin Brutus, sued the government over some government diversity policy he claimed was announced by Vice President Jack Dew sometime around December of 2020 or thereabouts. And that this policy is supposedly is seeking to balance the ethnic composition of the police force. He claiming that it's discriminatory because it contravenes sections of the Guyana Constitution and the Prevention of Racial Discrimination Act. Right? He also claimed that the policy disproportionately benefits officers of East Indian descent, specifically when it comes to promotion of top-ranking positions. He also contends that Afro-Guyanese officers, despite being more qualified, were passed over in favor of Indo-Guyanese officers to meet a diversity quota. This is a very, 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 very serious allegation. It's a very serious points. It's very serious points that are being raised. I hope that the matter itself will be looked at and not the person, because I saw a lot of comments on social and other media that related to the person itself as to whether the person was self-serving and so on. Be that as it may, he may very well be self-serving, but is the matter that he's raising a valid matter, right? Is it a valid matter, and should it be investigated and so on? I contend it's a valid matter, extremely valid, and I'll tell you why. Because this is not a new matter that he's raising. It's just for the first time, especially under this government, is being brought to the fore in terms of a policy, right? Because that policy itself was inherent in what, for example, Luncheon had said when questioned during the Freddie Kissoon Jagdio case in court, when Luncheon, had indicated that there was no black person in the civil service who could rise to the rank of ambassador. In other words, then they weren't qualified. I mean, this was the most heinous statement made that year, and perhaps even for the century, right? That African Guyanese who populated the civil service, dominated the civil service, indeed. And within a short space of time, you have somebody as qualified as Dr. Luncheon going on the stand and making this outrageous statement that there was no African Guyanese who was qualified to rise to the rank of ambassador. All right? But this issue about Indians joining the force and so on has its origins as far back as when the police force itself was established. And my memory tells me that the police force was established somewhere around 1880 or something. But I want to reference an article called History Notes on the Evolution of the Police in Guyana by Nigel Westmus. And it can be found in the Stabrook News, June 2nd, 2024. Okay, so it's a mere six months ago. Six to 4, and I again give so those rights in passing yesterday, I believe. But I think some more substantial work, particularly at this stage, should be done on our social media to explain those rights and exactly what happened. Because I lived through those rights. And I could tell you, it was the worst of time. It was the worst of times, you know. But happily, I made it through even as a small child. I remember them vividly. They're left scars on my mind. Anyhow, Westmont is saying that after the race riots of 1962, 1963, and 1964, the International Commission of Jurists back in 1965 recommended the introduction of, quote, racial quotas, unquote, mirror the ethnic demographic in the police force. Westmont also said that the issue of ethnic imbalance in the forces, inclusive of the army, should also be viewed in light of the wider political economy and in relation to other sectors where disparities in ethnic equality and representation still persist. Right? Now, you see, ethnic balance versus ethnic equity. These are two different things. You could do ethnic balancing to achieve ethnic equity. And what we mean here is this. Occupations, they evolve. There was once a time when free labor in the form of slavery was ensconced in agriculture. African free labor predominated in agriculture. And as we know, with freedom and so on, came a shift in occupations, in skills and occupations. Eventually, many of the Africans gravitating to the emerging civil service. And as such, the Ghana police force and latterly the army were dominated by people of African descent. So that is something that evolved over decades, if not centuries. And while you could have a government diversity policy, such a policy is not to be thought of lightly. Such a policy has to obviously be thought through and have the buy-in of the entire society, not just a government. It has to have the buy-in of an entire society because it has wider connotations, it has wider implications, it has sociological and other effects. So to come December 2020 or whenever it was to suggest that government now has implemented a government diversity policy when there had been no discussion, certainly no recent discussion, no buy-in, is always going to cause problems. Right? It's always going to cause problems. I think our Guyanese diaspora who are on this program, they're familiar with a similar program in the United States that was meant to assist blacks in America in areas where they were excluded. But they didn't just wake up and come up with such a policy. It was long thought through. It required the brains of a lot of top educationists and so on to come up with a strategy that will not, first of all, alienate the rest in the society and will not appear to be overtly discriminating, right? It was creating pathways for inclusion, right? Creating pathways for inclusion, but not outlandishly saying disrupting the status quo. So just for example, in your new recruitment, you will favor one race in terms of accepting positions over the other. providing that inclusion is not based strictly on race. So if you have, for example, 10 positions and 20 people applied, and you have 5 of the disadvantaged race, and sorry, if you have 20 positions and 20 people and 30 people applied, and in those 30 you had 10 of the disadvantaged race and 20 of the advantaged race, you have 20 positions. Then if you have 15 of the disadvantaged race who are qualified for the job, in other words, they have their CXCs, they have their whatever you want to call it, their height, their this, their that, their whatever, then you will take the 15. So in other words, then you're favoring the issue of them based purely on the inclusion, that you want to have the whole force now look more closely to what the society looks like. But to get a 1-to-1 position or a 3-to-2-to-1 position in every aspect of the government sector is craziness, and I don't think we should be aiming for that, especially when we're talking about the evolution of certain positions and so on. Now you can see why the government has suddenly turned its attention to the police force. We thought only for those reasons why they were favoring the police force, those known reasons, which is to use the force as the usual repressive arm of the state. But suddenly, in terms of perks and so on, the force has been extremely favored. The last being where constables, for example, have been, their starting salary are now $130,000, well above the minimum wage for 2025, because with the 8% that has already been agreed, the minimum wage goes to about $102,000. But constables will be starting at $130,000. The same as the lowest ranked individual in the army, in the prison service, and in the fire service. And then, of course, during 2024, there are a lot of adjustments that were made in the army and the police, in these armed forces, and so on. But basically, the police. So now we know what was the intent here. The intent was not so much that we elect the police, and we, of course, want to use them for whatever purposes we have in mind for them. But the intent here is to begin to make the benefits attractive enough for East Indian Guyanese to apply at the bottom. Because it has always been difficult, notwithstanding every effort, to get East Indians to go into the police force and the army, to be exact, and the prison service and the fire service. These forces have always been dominated by Guyanese of African descent. So we see now in the salaries, in trying to make the salaries attractive, it's an attempt to get East Indians to join the force. And by the way, that's not a bad thing. That's not a bad thing. I will come back to it, basically. But having tried with police community group, having tried with, or still to try some border security force, all with the intent of trying to create situations where Indians will join and quote unquote feel comfortable. And these haven't worked certainly in the way that they wanted. Several people joined police community because they thought they would get a gun, another way of getting a gun, because the usual way of applying and so on took too long or they didn't get through. When that didn't work, now we see this situation where the salaries and perks and conditions of the police service is being rapidly improved, because the intent is to get more Indians to join at the bottom. And as I said, that's not a bad thing. That is a very, very good thing. So for the African Guyanese and other indigenous Guyanese and other personnel in the police force, this is what we call a positive externality. All the years you've been rooting to get decent salaries and so on, and it didn't come. But now it has come because of a policy, of a government diversity policy that seeks to get Indians into the police force as rapidly as possible. And to do that, one of the things is to increase the salaries as rapidly as possible to make it attractive so that they will see it as a reason why they should now go on join. And as a result of that, you, the African, and you, the indigenous, and you and all the others, you guys have now benefited. That's a positive externality, right? And I'm glad for you. As to whether it will be enough to get Indians to change their minds about their other professions and join the force is a different matter. It will be, and not only Indian, but particularly female Indians, to deal with the female segments of the population, to get them to join the force. That will be a different matter. But we shall see. But it would appear in the meanwhile, while they're trying to get the bottom started, they have attacked the top. And this is where I believe you see Brutus has felt what he claims to be the brunt of the discrimination. Because suddenly, in a force that is about 90% African Guyanese or thereabouts, you have about 7 of the commanders out of 10 being of East Indian descent. Now, this is a statistic I'm sure the Wharton Business School, the Sloan Business School, and all these other business schools will be very interested in, because they will want to know, in that demographic of a 90% African-dominated force, how, all things being equal, how 7 of 10 commanders could be of an East Indian race. These are things that could be studied to find out how it happened. Because if there were genuine promotions and all these kinds of stories, and I'm not saying they're not, but Mr. Brutus is saying in his affidavit that it was not, that qualified people were bypassed, right? Qualified people were bypassed, and they were bypassed in a way that, that smells, according to his affidavit, not necessarily in that all the words, but that is what he was saying. So we will see how this will turn out. I hope it can be given the prominence and the seriousness that it deserves, because if left to fester, it can create social upheavals and social interruptions in the society, and it will not bode well for overall development of the country. The government, in the meanwhile, must come out openly and explain this government diversity policy. What is it about? What is it about? What are its targets and goals, and how are they going to go about implementing it? All right? Because it looks like it's a start off on the wrong footing, and using this man, as I said, it's going to cause problems. There are going to be, of course, negative and positive fallings and fallouts, so to speak. And these must be explained. And the government must indicate how they are going to manage these fallouts. It can't be doing that by bullying or by a situation the same way as the government policy. It can't be doing that. Because here's the problem. While you are displacing mostly African Guyanese from the professions that they have been accustomed, are you creating avenues into which they can go? Are you creating those avenues? Because if you have a goal to balance, quote unquote, balance the force by an intake of say 10-1 over the next say 5 years, are you preparing those who potentially would have gone into the force? Are you preparing outlets for which they can channel whatever skill or so on that they have? Are you preparing those outlets for them? And are you going to be balancing the private sector? Or are you going to be throwing up your hands and say, well, we don't control the private sector? Well, you may not control the private sector, but in your government diversity policy, you may also indicate, generally in terms of employment, what you expect. You may not be able to enforce it, right? The difference between, say, suggestive price and control price. You may not be able to enforce it, but at least you would put out guidelines in employment in the private sector. When you go to a number of places in the private sector, including the banks, in fact, certain banks more than others. Certain banks are so blatant, you wonder whether anybody other than one race is bank at that bank. But certainly in the banks, the insurance companies, I remember going into one insurance company and I almost walked out. Because I figured this insurance company was in another state other than Guyana. Right? So some of the private sector agencies, they whether consciously or unconsciously, they discriminate against African Guyanese. They discriminate against African Guyanese generally, and in many cases specifically as it relates to where they live. And we know this for a fact, you know. Many people don't put that they live in certain places because they know right away they won't get a call. No matter how bright they be, they won't get a call. So there are those stigmas that are still around. And we have to have an equal, get rid of this, what do you call it? Ethnic Relations Commission. It's a waste of time. You know, it's a waste of time. It's first of all, I remembered when we were doing the Natural Resource Fund and we had our 22-member Public Oversight Committee. The PPP claimed that it was unwieldy. It was too much and it was too long to make decisions. Well, what decision has the Ethnic Relations Commission made in recent time that is earth-shattering? What investigation have they done that is earth-shattering and so on? That is one of the agencies in the context of constitutional reform that should go. It should be completely disbanded, and we should create an equal opportunity employment commission or equal opportunity commission, or one akin to what the British have and the Canadians have and the United States have, right? And empower it to do a number of these investigations, because if you are going to gradually or with haste reduce the number of African Guyanese who dominate in the civil service and in the security services, then you're going to have outlets for them to gain employment. And if you don't create the conditions in the non-governmental sectors for them to compete fairly with others for employment, then you will be pouring the fuel. You will be creating the situations for social upheaval and disruption in society. So the government must come out and explain this so-called government diversity policy and all its impacts and ramifications. Indeed, for me, such a policy should have had the benefit of a white paper, then a green paper, a white paper discussed in the parliament and agreed nationally. Because as I said again, I believe generally people agree that the security forces must enjoy some level of balance. I'm not saying it will be completely balanced in terms of represent the geographic or represent the either the geographic or the ethnic composition in the society, but certainly a 9-10 in favor of African Guyanese that looks bad today in favor of, say, a 35-10 or something like that will be more representative of the society. I don't think we disagree with that. But like I'm saying, opportunities have to be opened in the non-governmental sector for people, for African Guyanese, for them to enter. And the other positive will be that African Guyanese themselves and their parents and friends and so on will encourage them to do and get education that doesn't steer them automatically into the armed services, into the security services, or into the civil service. There'll be more guidance perhaps from parents and guidance counselors and so on to train African Guyanese into professions, for example, that they proliferated not so long ago. And these in particular are the arts, the artisans, and so on, the trades, and so forth. And those, as you well know, are some of the skills that are missing in this transformation that is taking place here. When the government can boldly indicate that for last year they imported nearly 14,000 people, although there is no breakdown of the skill level of these people. But we know for sure that they imported among those 14,000 foreigners, they imported truck drivers, and they imported nurses, and they imported teachers. And these are trades, as we well know, that were dominated by Guyanese of African descent. When you look around for a plumber, a trained plumber, not one who just looking on and trying and wasting your materials and so on. When you look around in Guyana for a trained plumber, a trained carpenter, a trained joiner, a trained cabinet maker, a trained mechanic, because you have mechanics proliferating all over the place, but many of them just tinkering with your car, and so on. And these are skills in demand, and these are areas that we can get people, in addition to the traditional academic area, but I'm talking about where instead of going in. And I joined in the call that was made recently by Nigel Hughes, but I will go further and say to bring back the national service. He tried to be politically correct. Well, he's trying to be a politician. I am saying bring back the national service in all its elements, because the breakdown of discipline in this country suggests that we need a national service that could provide both the discipline and the skill set and the education set. Because people in national service, the original national service, were exposed to education of various forms. They were exposed to skills of various forms. And they were exposed to the discipline part of it. It was not about picking up gun and shooting. Today, we relish if we had a national service in areas like Papaya and Camarang and Tumari and so on. All areas that are close to the Venezuelan border. We relish if we had a national service center in those places with settlements and so on. So let's not dance around national service. Perhaps, again, it should be the subject of a renewed white paper. And all people who idle hands are doing, because when you look at the crime setup, when you look at crimes that are being committed today, and you look at the age group, you cringe. And if we think we're going to shoot all of them and kill them, in addition to it being a human rights another problem, we must think again. You know, and national service would have done an excellent job. It's unfortunate we run into trouble in terms of monies and so on, and we have to start closing centers and so forth. But products of national service like Govayo, like I believe the guy who was at Go Invest, and Joe Singh and Norman McLean, they were directors general and so on. They can tell you about the value of national service. So when you strip away all the politics and so on from it, national service was a good thing for Guyana, and will be a good thing for Guyana in the context of what is evolving today. So I join and request that go in. So there's a lot of things that could come out, and I wish we will have some more discussions on this government diversity policy. It sounds sinister, but let's get the government an opportunity to explain what is behind it. Come out in the open and let's have a discussion about it and see where we can refine it, where we can broaden it, and where we can gain acceptability on it. And I hope it doesn't go the route of the National Development Strategy, which I explained last week, was voted down by the very government who prepared it. All right, so that's my 2 cents on that. Well, as you know, we are at T minus 24. That is the countdown to the 2025 budget. Back in the day when, as I said some time back, budget used to be exciting. Back in the day when we had force oil announced in 2015, the euphoria that enveloped the society was one at which we thought we were rich overnight. And with each successive find, we were more ecstatic than before. Until we realized that these finds, the original find and the subsequent finds of oil, weren't doing much for us, weren't resulting in any improvement, any significant or any major improvement in our quality of life, our living conditions, and our station of life. In fact, in any of a number of occasions, it worsened our then existing conditions. The fishermen will tell you that because they couldn't fish and find what? Fish, right? The average person would tell you that because they had to experience horrendous increases in living conditions and so on. Similarly with these budgets, this is the 6th budget to be presented by this government. And with each successive budget, a feeling of hopelessness deepened with each successive budget to such an extent that with T-24, there's no palpitation of the heart, there's no excitement. In fact, there is more worry and there is more hope that the Father will touch the heart of these stone cold planners, if I want to give planning a bad name, or these people who are in charge of this government, and bring substantial and substantive relief to a suffering population who had to endure the hoax of 2024 of a cash grant transfer. Hoax. By their own reckoning, they said 600,000 people they were catering for. But they were only able to pay 90,000 of that so-called 600,000 that they were catering for. 90,000 divided by 600,000 is failed in any part of the world, including Russia. It's failed. And as we will come down later on, we will show it continues a trend of failure by PPP governments when they attempt to execute medium to large projects. And this was I don't know, let's call it a medium project. Abject failure. So this is the sixth budget, and we are T-24. Here are some features of the past budgets. Under the coalition, remember we came in May 2015, and we exited August the 2nd, 2020. So in that 5 years and 2.5 months, the coalition would have expended 1,346.8 billion dollars. $1,346.8 billion in 5 years, 2.5 months. A period when there was no oil. A period when the coalition had to endure one year and roughly 7 months or 8 months thereabout of being under a no confidence motion environment. And we were able to just spend $1,346.8 billion. And for our overseas friends, that's approximately equal to $6.56 billion US. The PPP government, enjoying the sweat of the coalition government to put in the structures and so on for oil, between 2020, August 2020, and the end of last year, would have spent $3,273.3 billion. $3,273.3 billion. Right? So, in a matter of 4 years and 5 months, they were able to spend $3,273.3 billion. And again, for our overseas friends, that's roughly 15.86 billion US dollars. Roughly 15.86 billion US dollars, or about 2.5 times So in 4 years and 5 months, they were able to spend 2.5 times what we were able to spend in 5 years and 2.5 months. Last year's budget expenditure, because they went for supplementary of $125 billion roughly. So assuming they spent all, then their latest estimate for the expense for 2024 would be roughly $1,270.6 billion. So last year's $1,220.6 billion, last year's budget alone was almost equal to our budget for 5 years, 2.5 months. Let that sink in. Last year's budget alone of last year's spending alone of $1,270.6 billion was almost equal to our expenditure for 5 years and 2.5 months of $1,346.8 billion. That's to show you the magnitude of spending that they did. And what we achieved, let's go to it. What we achieved by spending $1,346.8 billion, and in the context in which we achieved it, cannot be said for last year's budget. What were the achievements of last year's budget? Nothing but abject failures. We already pointed out the failure of the cash grant. We pointed out the high cost of living. And this cash grant, when it was first announced, was meant to assist with the cost of living. So if you were aiming for 600,000 people, only 90,000 people were stand to have benefited from the cash grant and therefore had the impacts of the cost of living ameliorated. And when you look at these people in the 90,000, the bulk of them were civil servants, already getting a monthly salary and benefits. Not grudging them, I'm merely bringing out the fact that the people who were targeted for cash transfer in the 90,000 were mostly civil servants, or we call them public servants and public officers. People who are already in possession of a monthly salary and monthly benefits and so on, and back pay for last year, and salary increases for last year, and now then cash transfer for last year. There was a sprinkling of people who benefited in Region 9, I believe in Region 1, sprinkling, and some people after the pushing and the fighting and the tugging a war, NIS pensioners who had registered at NIS. But the bulk, no doubt, 90% maybe, of that 90,000 were public servants and public officers. And I'm not saying all public servants and public officers, because many teachers and many public servants didn't benefit. Even parliamentarians, that small number, some of them didn't benefit. But the people who should have benefited immediately, the pensioners, and all the NIS people, pensioners, and all the old age pensioners, and all those on disability, and all those on public assistance, they never were counted. And if the chaos that superintended the cash transfer of last year is anything to go by, it's enough to tell these people enough is enough. Because it's not about resources, it's about the management of those resources. Resources abound. Resources are plenty. But it's the management of the resources. And you have to ask the question, having seen the bungling of the cash transfer, can you trust these people with your money? Can you trust these people with your money? In these big budgets, because you're going to hear about another big budget this year. If you look at the estimates for 2024, the indicative budget for 2025 is $1,236.2 billion. $1,236.2 trillion. Well, they have already exceeded this figure by last year's expenditure. Because let us remind ourselves, last year's expenditure was $1,270.6 billion. So they have exceeded, in 2024, they have exceeded the indicative amount for 2025 by roughly, that would be $34.4 billion. So we know if every year is the biggest budget ever, that the budget for 2025 will be somewhere in the region of 1.4 trillion, or who knows, maybe even $2 trillion, because it's election time. It's election time, and it's goodies time. It's goodies time. It's more cash grants that you couldn't even get the first one going. You get it more, so there's going to be more confusion. It's going to be more sellouts, but we'll come back to that again. Let us stay with this analysis of what they have done so far, or not done so far. And all this expenditure led to the incurrence of massive deficits, massive budget deficits. Let's be very clear, friends. Deficits and debts go together. It is deficits that make debts. And I like to remind people, those who lived through the 70s and 80s and so on, that profligate spending in the 70s and 80s, in the midst of declining revenues or projected increases in revenues, led to large deficits and ultimately large debts. Because to finance a budget deficit, you have to borrow, or you have to draw down on whatever savings you have, or both, because one may not be sufficient with the other. And this is what the government has been doing. The government has gone on a borrowing binge. It has gone on a borrowing binge to such an extent that the government even borrowed a small sum of money from the IDB to indulge in training of staff of the Ministry of Finance and some other places. That is the borrowing binge to which we have gone on. And an external debt stock that was in somewhere in the region of about $1.3 billion when the government came in, was anticipated to move to $2.8, $2.9 billion US dollars by the end of last year. $2.9 billion. And since the Exim Bank loan that was anticipated last year, it was approved, but the drawdown didn't happen. As we know, the Exim Bank loan is $527 million. So that will add $527 million to the already burgeoning debt. That will take us to roughly 2.95%. That will take us about 3.4 billion US with that 527. And then a frightening statement came out of the Minister with responsibility for finance in the office of the President and Public Service and so on. He says that all of the 2 billion envelope that was extended by Exim Bank will be used by the government. So that leaves roughly another 1.5 or thereabouts, because you get 527, so it leaves another one close to 1.5. And if you were to use up that, it will add to the debt. That will carry the debt to almost $5 billion US dollars in a short space of time. Once they use up all that money, because he says the government intends using up the entire 2 billion US envelope that was made available by Exim Bank. And by the way, I'm hoping that at tomorrow's session, they would lay in the National Assembly the contract signed with Exim Bank. Because under the External Loans Act, once the contract is signed, it's supposed to be laid in the National Assembly soon thereafter. Soon thereafter. So let's hope that they will be laying it tomorrow. If not tomorrow, then sometime during the budget debate. So we will see exactly what are the terms of this loan and what would the loan be financing. Because like I said in my previous thing, I don't trust what was being said about the terms of the loan, because nobody has said up to now what will happen with the so-called grace period, whether the interest during that grace period will be capitalized and turned into the loan. So we need to see the loan and we need to see the term sheets and so on. But that was an aside, a useful aside. Do you know that the Exim Bank loan alone of $527 million is more than the entire sum borrowed by the coalition government in 5 years and 2.5 months? Do you know? Well, I'm telling you that the coalition government in that 5 years and 2 months, from May 26, 2015 to March 31st, 2019, contracted $356.7 million in that 5 year plus period. $356.7 million US dollars. And of that amount, of that $356.7 million, more than $150 million were loans that were already indicated under the Ramatara government. Such loans like the Chinese loan to build the east, to resurface or whatever the east Coast Road, the 50 million that was indicated for the Ogle Eccles Road that is now being done. 10 million, I remembered, for the ship that going to Northwest, because the Indians had put away $10 million, and a couple others. Those loans were already, but they weren't signed. So they were signed under the coalition government, and we accept them because we could have given them up, but we signed them, and therefore it's part of the debt contracted under the coalition government. No question about it. So one loan contracted by this government from the Exim Bank alone is more than the entire sum that was contracted under the coalition government. a borrowing spree. And what? This $527 million loan was contracted for a gas to shore project that every day increasingly seems onshore. No pun intended. That every day seems to be onshore. Because all you're hearing now, you don't get any visible signs of progress, right? Like they love to show about the Demerara Harbor Bridge, right? The new Demerara Harbor Bridge. You don't get any visible signs, but you get signs of disagreement. You get signs of unplanned. You get these signs that are represented by numerous claims by contractors. And so far, Linseco, CH4, whatever the name, they have claims of about $100 million US. $100 million US. And yet still, you are hearing government saying that if we're going to cut tariffs by 50%. This is a song that has been sung from day one. And notwithstanding all the rising costs, a project that was originally to cost roughly about $800 million US or $600 million US, that go to $800 million US, is now in excess of $2 billion US, and still it will cut electricity costs by 50%. And to show, you got to laugh. Ali is on record as saying, even if the project is not finished for 2025, they will cut electricity costs by 50%. My friends, who you think will pay? Who you think will pay for that cut? You think everything comes in free? No, it doesn't come in free. It doesn't come in free. That is the kind of mismanagement you got going on in this country. And you think this cookie monster that has a large appetite for borrowing, notwithstanding what happened in Ghana and Nigeria and all these different places, you will think that this cookie monster will stop to think and assess. No. No. Once cookies are there to be crunched and munched, they will eat. So they went after the Natural Resource Fund. They went after our savings account, the Natural Resource Fund. When they came in to power, we had left a fund that was untouched. It was now gathering steam. Remember, oil was December 2019. Then you had COVID in 2020, right? It was now gathering steam. To such an extent, by the time they tinkered and emasculated the Natural Resource Fund into a new 2021 NRF Act, they put into that act that they will clean out. They will clean out our fund. And that is what they did. They cleaned out the entire balance in the fund that was untouched. Cleaned it out, $600 and something million US, cleaned out. And between 2022 and last year, they would have cleaned the Natural Resource Fund of $575 billion. $575 billion, which would have been enough. Which would have been enough to finance our 2018 and 2019 budgets and not impose a single tax, whether income, VAT, anything, on the entire country. That's how stark that is. Their withdrawals from the Natural Resource Fund of $557 billion over the years 2022, 2023, 2024 would have been enough to finance our 2018 and 2019 expenditure and not impose a single tax on the citizens of this country. Not a single tax. Well, income tax, VAT, import duties, customs, and none. Not a single tax. That is a stark reality. So that when they continue to raid our savings fund, and anybody will tell you, you must save for a rainy day, and rainy days will come. Rainy days will come. And when they come, it will find our natural resource fund close to being empty. In other words, then, unable to cushion us while the deluge is contained. It will come. And you know what is even more horrifying? Is the fact that this expenditure is not leading to modernization of this country as we know modernization. I keep telling people because it is easy to jump across to Trinidad. It is easy to jump across to Barbados. Barbados without our oil and all these kinds of things. Go look at their infrastructure. Go look at their infrastructure. When Barbados built highway, the ABC highway, they call it the Adams Barrow, can't remember who this is. Highway. That is a highway. You build the Heroes Highway, and bar none, there are huge complaints, and then they got people you got to go back there and say, but you're patching the highway. You patching. This is not leading to the modernity that we know. They refuse to build flyovers. They refuse to build pedestrian crossing above. Thus, everybody got to face all these traffic, painting pedestrian crosses on highways and all these kind of story. People got to cross. How many people in die on the East Bank Road trying to cross over a busy road? And when they build it, they don't enforce it. It's allowed to crumble. It's allowed to crumble. It was built under the coalition. We in trouble in that, let crumble. That's the kind of folly we have in this country. People trying to beat sand trucks by running across the road and ended up in St. Peter's Pearly Gates. You don't see it. You don't see it. I see they're trying to shore up on stellar performance. Ali has appeared on successive live Facebook last week. It was Facebook Live, and he berating the coalition government about bauxite and forestry. Bauxite. 50% of people last, and so on. Let him tell you, or let me remind them, the people who lost their jobs in bauxite, in due to the government, it is due to investor. It was due to investor who had no regards for the government of Guyana and Guyana. None whatsoever. And those people who lost the job will tell you they would rather lose the job than be re-enslaved, because they lived in horrendous conditions and they were treated horrendously. And I hope Lincoln Lewis, whose union was part of that. An investor who thumbed their nose on the government of Guyana at the time, as we sought to intervene, thumbed their nose. And the people there said, enough is enough. We will not be re-enslaved. So run out there and talk about 50% of people lost jobs and 50 jobs lost and so on. It's your PPP brought them here and allowed them to flout the labor laws of this country. And that was the thing of the coalition. Cleaning up mess after mess after mess. That is what we were forced to do. I saw a Facebook post yesterday. Some chap, his name suggested that he might be in opinion dissent, talking about how 200 taxes and being free up the economy, then the economy was stagnant. The economy, when we inherited it, was built on sun and fuel by drugs. Built on sun and fuel by drugs. How many people remembered that the PPP government refused to allow the DEA to establish in Guyana? How many people remember that? How many people remember that the DEA only came to Guyana after the coalition government came into power? And as President Dave Granger carried war on drugs, clean out the whole place for the drugs, allow genuine investors to operate and breed, and they started to return to profits. During our campaign in a particular part of South Georgetown, I never forget I met this young man. He said, "Hey, Mr. Jordan, the money man, where bring for you?" And he had a good gap and so on. He said, "I don't worry, no confidence motion, man. We voting for y'all," and so on. He said, "But here now, I want when y'all go back there, y'all must free up the economy." I said, "Okay, what do you mean by the buy?" He said, you know, under the PPP, them by how it's running. I said, "What do you mean by the buy?" He said, you gotta let some of the thing pass, man. You gotta let some of the white powder pass. I said, "Bye, here no happen, no. I ain't think that gonna happen, right? We spend too long cleaning up the economy of that." I said, if we get back there, you can see how rapidly the economy will progress, because now the economy has been cleaned. It's like spiled blood. Spiled blood, if you got it in there, you're always feeling sick. But if you are able to get it out and put in pure blood, new blood and so on, it starts to regenerate and your face starts getting that shine and sheen and everything starts growing back and so on. I said, that is what we are doing with the economy. But lo and behold, as soon as we were thrown out, it didn't take too long. Between 2020 and last year, you might be astonished to know how much drugs were quote unquote discovered. There's only way to discover, the last being the 4,000 ton or whatever in the Northwest. And my understanding, that's a small iceberg. That's a small iceberg. And of course, like the gold that disappeared in Curacao, you can't find out this operation, who was behind it. Not even the small fry has been charged after months. Not even a small fry has been charged after months. And now you have the ridiculousness of a minister refusing to name in which country were the people overseas charged. Can't name the country. That's a state secret also. So that is where people must remember these things. People must remember these things. The mess that the coalition had to clean up in bauxite. They sold us out to Bison Lin and all them. We took Bison Lin them to court. They sold us out, and he talking about forestry. Forestry dead. We did audit. we did an audit of forestry and found out that the forestry fund was used for things that were not forestry, that were used for things that were not forestry. Including building some massive building on High Street. And he came back again this week with another live. This time he's there, 20 minutes, with graphs and all kind of things, looking highly uncomfortable. I don't know why he's go through all the pain and torture. Graphs about how private investment in Guyana during the coalition government stagnated and how it grew by leaps and bounds as soon as the coalition came in. Well, I tell you this much though. We had some difficulties with the private sector. Certain elements, not the private sector, certain elements in the private sector who control the private sector. We had our difficulties with them. But we worked around those difficulties because the private sector is not about a few, mostly men, who think they own this country. There were decent people in the private sector who refused to be associated with those individuals, even though they were in the premier private sector institutions in this country. And they were decent people who refused to be part of those institutions. And they weren't only the small ones. So he was there with this graph and so on. The graph talked about mid-2020 under the coalition and mid-2024 under the present government. And they provided both nominal GDP and nominal increases, not nominal GDP, nominal investment, private sector investment in certain sectors. And the percent increase between mid-2020 and mid-2024. Let me just go through them quickly. On agriculture, it says 12.5 billion was invested in under the coalition for the coalition period, 24.6 billion under the PPP period. All these are private investment. For manufacturing, it says 15.1 billion under the coalition period, 22.3 billion under the PPP period, for a 7% increase. Construction, 10.6 billion under the coalition period, 20.4 billion mid 2024 for the PPP, 93% increase. Mining, 4.2 billion up to mid 2020 under the coalition, 6.9 billion mid 2024 under PPP, increased 65%. Other services, coalition 47.8 billion up to mid 2020, 107.2 billion up to mid 2024, 124%. And finally, real estate mortgages. Mid 2020, 88.7 billion under the coalition, 140.2 billion mid 2024 under the PPP, increased 58%. And the man was crowing about these increases. He was crowing about these nominal increases. I wouldn't have crowed about these nominal increases because none of them stands out as being stellar. Simply because you are in an oil situation compared to a non-oil situation in the PPP. These numbers you should have been talking about 500 and 1,000%, not 97 and anemic 47% as in the case of MFG. In fact, the highest percent that is 100, nominal percent that is over 100 is in other services. Not in critical areas of agri, manufacturing, construction, mining, and mining. It's in other services. I don't know what you're calling about, but guess what? Guess what? Guess what I hit you with? Now, investment, private investment is a part of the gross domestic product. Right? It's part of the gross domestic product. So, I went and get the gross domestic product for each one of these for each one of these years, 2020, and I make an estimate of 2024 because we don't have half year GDPs for these people. So I put it on the whole year GDP just to get a broad framework. And this is what I find. As a percent of GDP, mid 2020, agriculture was 1.1%. This is the private sector I'm talking about, the private sector investment. As a percent of GDP at mid 2020, under the coalition, it was 1.1%. Under the PPP, it was 0.6%. It didn't even attain the 1.1%. It was 0.6%. In manufacturing, under the coalition, that $15.1 billion up to mid 2020 represented 1.3% of GDP. But at least $22.3 billion at mid 2024 represented 0.5% of GDP. Less than half what was attained by the coalition government, private investment under the coalition government. In construction, the $10.6 billion invested by the private sector at mid 2020 represented 0.9% of GDP. But the $20.4 billion invested by the private sector at mid 2024 under the PPP represented a mere 0.5% of GDP. Just over half of what was attained in 2020 without oil. Continuing, mining the $4.2 billion that was invested by the private sector at mid 2020 represented 0.4% of GDP. But his 6.9% invested by the private sector at mid 2024 represented 0.2% of GDP. Just half of what was achieved at mid 2020. In other services, the $47.8 billion that was invested by the private sector at mid 2020 represented 4.2% of GDP. But his $107.2 billion that was invested by the private sector at mid 2024 represented only 2.4% of GDP. Again, just slightly over half of that attained in mid 2020. And finally, in terms of real estate mortgages, the $88.7 billion that was invested by the private sector at mid 2020 represented 7.8% of GDP. But his $140.2 billion that was invested by the private sector at mid 2024 represented 3.2% of GDP, less than half of what was accomplished and achieved in mid 2020. So, my friend, what is this all about? Huh? Trumping numbers, nominal numbers, and trying to compare oil period and non-oil period and so on. Compare your relative and see what you get, like what we just produced here. See what you get. They're leading you up a gum tree to take the fall, Ali. That's what they're doing. They're leading you up a gum tree to take the fall. And I know they're saying how now, they're saying that this year's budget is going to concentrate on communities. And a question has been rightfully asked. Which communities? Which communities? And who decided on who was consulted on the communities? And which communities to visit and so on. But they don't care about that. They don't care about consultations and so on. And so you see Ali running into communities, particularly African-dominated communities like Buxton, Melanie Damishano, and so on. And talking about pig rearing in Buxton and beehive in Melanie and Strathspey and so on. The more things change, the more they remain the same. When this government came into power, they met a project called a RAID project. Rural Agriculture Infrastructure Development, RAID project. And this project, which apparently had unfavorable mention by an individual or going under the moniker Peeping Tom in May 2022. He had written a letter. No, sorry. This Peeping Tom had insinuated that no one was something to the effect that no one mentioned anything adverse when our government was invested in so-called black communities on the RAID project. But now we were making a fuss. I think it had to do with the fact that the opposition leader Norton had gone and visited some neglected black communities on the quarantine. I remember Zambia, or Little Zambia, whatever they call it, and so on. And so this Peeping Tom had written this thing. And I had to write a letter. Because sometimes people talk not from the head, but not from the head or the mouth, but from that other orifice. What Peeping Tom did not know was that under the PPP, Ramattar government, the CARICOM Development Fund had approved $11 million to finance agri-development in the communities Perico, Ruby, Luluni, and Unvowak. You go and check the voting patterns and see if these communities vote for the PNC, the APNU, the AFC. These are all voting farms of the PPP. And when the project was designed, it wasn't designed for 2 African villages and 2 Indian villages. It was designed for 4 predominantly Indian villages. $11 million was taken from the CARICOM Development Fund to finance development here. And this project, this RAID project, was run successfully. So by the time we came in, the CARICOM Development Fund approached us for a phase 2 of this project in the same communities. And we had to put our foot down. We were executing a new country assistance strategy. And we said, no. That's not going to happen. Our thing is to spread development as wide and as far as possible, number one. And given our limited resources, we have to maximize these resources in other communities, especially unserved and underserved communities, neglected communities. Hence, our coming up with 4 predominantly African villages known for their agriculture in the recent past. Buxton, Ready for Wacton Triumph, Moko Arcadia, and Ithaca. Those were the 4 villages we picked to benefit from Rate 2. And the project was designed to bring about 2,500 acres of abandoned lands back of these villages back into cultivation. It was also an attempt to organize about 1,200 farmers into cooperatives, supplying excavators, tractors, pumps, etc., so that they can continue the project after the project ended. And you began to see new life in these communities. I went there, I visited these projects. You began to see life. And they now started market days in those communities, putting their fruits of their labor on display. And guess what? As soon as the government come in, they mash up the project, they take away the tractors and everything else from the people, mash up the project. And you're running into these communities now and telling them, we love you, or we can give you a pig for farm. After mashing up these communities, people must know these things. They don't know these things. They must know these things. Mash up the project, borrowed funds that could have us now, Buxton and these places, well known for their agriculture. The train used to stop. At Buxton and Mahiko and these places, we stop and we jump out and we shop on thing. But well, under the PPP, those farms were mowed down. Perennial trees were cut down. And somebody said they could stand on the veranda and see right through the village after cutting down all these things. Now you're running into these people like Father Christmas, telling them how, we can send NDIA in for dig a drain here and dig a drain. We were doing that under the rape project, and we were intending to replicate that rape project all across the country. But what? Some people thought it best to kick us out of government. And now you got these ones who tell Jesus, not me, but the cargon crew. And you got the betrayals. But the same mess of pottage. But happily, there are more believers than betrayers. And I'm buoyed by the meetings I have as I float around doing my business about the people who contact me, who come forward and talking. They need people to talk to. They want to hear what is going on. They know what we did for them. They know what was not done for them under this government. They know about the promises, and they know that they will come with promises. I say to you, extract your pound of flesh without any drop of blood. Extract your pound of flesh, then go into that booth. Go into that booth, and with eyes wide open, do your thing. Let us send a message to this government that they cannot play with our monies. They cannot play with our lives. You spend $3-something trillion up to the end of 2024 and have poverty at 48%, more than the poverty that you inherited when you came in 2020. Way more than the poverty. You have not made a dent into poverty. Any metric you consider, they have not made a dent in. Any metric. And it's always blame somebody else, not them. It's not them to blame. It's somebody else. Now we ain't getting gold output. Oh no, there's no smuggling. We don't know about any smuggling. No, there's not smuggling. It's that the weather. If you ain't got flood, if you ain't got too much rain, you got too much sun. Always the weather. The weather is always. If you want to blame anybody, blame the weather. Oh, it's labor shortage. It's labor shortage, you know. Oh, those people they are going into other professions. Well, if gold price, as the guy last said, the gold price is for $2,800 something announced, the highest, I believe, ever, or certainly in recent times, and people are leaving the job because they're going to find other jobs at the highest price of gold. Who this man fooling, man? Tell me, who you talking to? Stupid bill? Oh no, it's labor shortage in the thing. They're going into what other avenues are they going? So it's not them. But rice has come out at 700 and some thousand tons. Oh, it's due to our policies. It's due to our policies, and so on. But if it's going around, oh no, not us. No, it's something else. It's the weather, it's labor shortage, it's PNC, it's PPP, it's PP, it's the AFC, something else. But it's not we. It's not we. How you are going to contend with such a thing? And we didn't get a chance to talk about some more thing, but we're going to this is budget week. This whole thing is budget week and next week and so we will continue. All right, I will give you some startling information about sugar and so on. And by the way, notwithstanding what they have been saying, there is an acute shortage of foreign currency in oil-rich Guyana. Yesterday, I read a post by Bort Wilkinson, eminent journalist. And I call a couple of people, and it's confirmed, at least, that getting foreign currency is harder than pulling a wisdom tooth. But we will deal with that and other aspects over the budget week, because budget week is from this week right through to the end of January or early February. And we will deal with various aspects of the budget and as we go along. But as far as possible, we will come to bring you the facts whenever they try to blow out those wind of lies and untruths in front of us, because they think people forget, and those who forget are gullible, and they are pliable, and they can be targeted. They can be easily targeted. Those who forget. There's a difference between those who forget and those who don't want to remember. But we will explore that difference another time. Hey, thank you, Kadapi, and hope you had an interesting morning.
Indeed, an interesting one. Thank you, Mr. Jordan, for your time. It's now 13 minutes past 9 o'clock, and it's the 16th of January in the year 2025. I'm your host. You're tuned to the Guyanese Morning. Mr. Jordan is always presenting some jewels, and like he promised, in the coming days, he's going to continue to do these discourses on Camps TV. So tune in. Tell a friend. Call a friend, tell a friend to tune in. Those who didn't tune in this morning, alert them, tell them of this morning's discourse, and let them follow the discussions here. Thank you, viewers. Thank you all for your continued support by sharing the program. Whatever little financial contribution you make, whatever word of encouragement you give, thank you, thank you, thank you. Remember, it's coming up on the 26th, right at Club Twilight.
Club Twilight presents Sunday 26th January, the big people after lunch and oldies bacchanal. Yes, at Club Twilight, Sideline Dam, Buxton North. Music by Supercat One Man Band, Camps Audio, Disco Baby, and popular DJs. Check it out. It's the big people. After lunch oldies bacchanal at Club Twilight, Sunday 26th January. It's gonna be a back in time movie.
And if you're a promoter or a vendor and you're looking for some ice, EC Crystals as an ice sale. Yes, they're putting ice on sale. Imagine that you have an ice sale. If you buy 5 bags of ice, you get 10% off. If you buy 10 bags of ice, you get 20% off. So what a better deal. Spend less and make more. Check EC Crystals. Check them out in Sideline Dam, Buxton North. Right at Club Twilight and you'll get some ice at a reduced price. That offer lasts for the next 2 weeks. Comes to an end at the end of January. So have a good one. Much love. See you tomorrow. It's Free Talk Friday tomorrow. We'll talk the thing and we'll talk about the things. Have a good one. See you all around. Y'all want some more of the ERC song? Why not? This song was specially done for the ERC, so why not? Play the thing, boy. Play the thing. Play the thing, boy. Play the thing.
I sit down at home decided to watch some TV, listening to the news like Gordon Mosley. I listening to the things that he say he tracked him tonight, paying close attention to make sure I hear it right. Now when I hear the things that he mentioned on the news, I had to declare them kind of thing got me confused. I hear some things where the ERC noticing, and it convinced me that people they learning nothing. We hear so many times about them big name calling, and they say the ERC pretend that they didn't learn nothing. But once you're black and you just decide to say a word or two, bet your life on that. They say the ERC coming for you. Listen to the things you just hear on social media. Only one set of people allowed to talk in one Guyana. I still say nothing black people in learning. But this is my concern. I hope one day black people will learn. Something about this ERC that I would like to know. If any of its members happens to be black people, and if that is the case, I want them to answer this call. Tell me how come none of them ain't got no voice at all. You're showing signs of weakness and you're afraid to be fair, and we see the same thing keep happening year after year. And the day will come when all this nonsense will stop. That will be the day when black people decide to wake up. Not so long ago, something terrible happened. This young Indian man want to kill out all black people by poison. But if his shoes was on the other foot, would have been a big threat. But up to this day, this ERC can do nothing as yet. How come it's only black people committing cybercrime? When pretty on social media fussing people all the time, I still say people in learning. But one day will come when the entire table will turn. Plenty of these issues we see that fail to condemn, because these people think that the law is only for them. And anybody else who decide to file a complaint, they go call you a racist and don't want to hear nothing. Plenty complaint from time to time has been brought to their attention, but because of this one-sided cybercrime, is why they don't show any concern. There's only one set of people that they really care about, and the people must take the abuse and shut them out. The Dachi Amsterdam went to court just recently for an issue that was highlighted by the CRC. And the pretext the police decide to jump on his case. Without a search warrant, they went and search up the man's place. Let us all agree that black people under attack. Different laws for you and me just because we black. I still singing, black people in London. To all my black friends, we must put a stop to all this nonsense. Cybercrime laws to keep us silent, just to make sure nobody criticize this government. And while that is a very criticism of dictatorship, it is no surprise that the ERC ignoring it. Why only the chosen few is allowed to have things their way, when people like me and you must have nothing to say? And when ministers in the government start to launch their attack, you never hear this ERC come out and talk about that. They send a policeman all the way to New York. This fella went up there to serve a customer on with forward. And that is it, this government decide to fabricate a case. But like they forget the warning they get from Latisha James. The vice president described that he use a shallow life. Because of this kind of abuse, he don't have a wife. I still singing, black people in learning. Just the other day, I hope your man see help is on the way.